Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this Achates live session on Thursday, 9th of April. Today, we are going to be discussing earned income. My name is Jacoba Bruneel, and I'm a consultant at Achates, and I'm joined today by my colleague Deborah Larwood, who's Achates Director of Income Generation. We are a consultancy providing support to cultural organisations with fundraising, recruitment, strategy, organisational change planning, and impact evaluation. We take our name from Greek and Roman mythology. Achates was a close friend and loyal advisor to Aeneas, so we think our name quite neatly describes the relationship that we offer to our clients in the cultural sector. Achates Life was set up to really support the sector, bringing fundraisers and other arts professionals together to discuss key topics and also to enable you to help and support each other. Whilst we obviously acknowledge that Achates doesn't necessarily have all the answers, what we absolutely do have is an overview of the sector itself, and we are incredibly passionate about using this perspective and role in a supportive way. It's worth saying that all of the information shared in today's conversation is, of course, correct at the time of broadcast. Today's session, as I mentioned, will be focused on earned income generation, and my colleague Deborah will chair a discussion with our two brilliant panelists. So I'm delighted to hand you over to her to welcome our guests who will be exploring this topic with us today. Over to you, Deborah.
Thanks, Jacoba, and a big welcome to everybody. I'd like to start by setting a bit of context around the topic that we'll be exploring today, the generation of earned income. Most cultural sector organisations aim for a mixed income portfolio of contributed or fundraised income and earned income in order to spread risk and enhance resilience. As we experience an ever more expensive and challenging environment in which to secure fundraised income, we know that the sector's interest is in strengthening earned income streams, and that's increasing. Arts Council England's National Portfolio Organisation annual data submission for 2024-25 showed that across the portfolio of some 956 funded organisations in England at that time, earned income accounted for around 51% of the total income. Now, when thinking about the balance of types of income, it's important to note that historically, organisations in the cultural sector have at times been over-reliant on any one source of income, and this of course presents an element of insecurity. The COVID pandemic exposed this when all public performances and events ceased, and with it, the traditional forms of earned income. So by that we mean paying audiences and visitors, participants, catering, retail. And this of course is an extreme example, but it illustrates an important point. What we at Achates believe is a pressing need for the sector to think differently about business models and to embrace new ways of working. Funders also recognise that adaptation of business models and strategic improvements to infrastructure are really critical for the cultural sector to reach its potential and develop its resilience. From the Bloomberg Digital Accelerator Programme to the Fidelity UK Foundation, funders have a vested interest in supporting organisations to become more self-sufficient so that their ability to achieve their purpose is enhanced. Now, by focusing on organisational purpose, entrepreneurial opportunities can be unlocked with integrity, and cultural organisations can harness the valuable assets that they have to address different market needs and generate new income in the process. And this includes exploiting the potential of non-traditional assets, including those which are not linked to the operation of a venue, such as a piece of technology or digital infrastructure, or of course in organisations without venues and those with more intangible assets, such as specific skill sets, knowledge or lived experience. So, with this background in mind, I'd like to now introduce our two fantastic panellists today who are going to talk us through their own approaches to generating earned income within their own organisations. I'm really delighted to be joined by Paula Sanchez and Peter Swindle. Paula is Head of Communications and Development at National Centre for Writing and has been so for over 4 years, previously working in similar roles across a range of arts and cultural organisations in the east of England, from music to community arts in the charity sector. Paula has supported a range of organisations to diversify their income generation, their marketing, their audience development, alongside developing capital projects and fundraising for them. Hello, Paula. And then secondly, as I mentioned, we welcome Peter Swindle. Peter is the Executive Director and Joint CEO of Little Angel Theatre. Peter has worked across the arts industries for the last 20 years in various roles, including at the Barbican Centre, Guildhall School, independent production companies, and, as I mentioned, currently at Little Angel Theatre, where she has been since 2017. She's a chartered management accountant with a passion for creativity and enjoys using her finance and administrative skills to increase organisational efficiency and resilience, enabling more time and energy to be concentrated on the organisation's primary purpose. Hello, Peter. Now,
Hello.
Paula and Peter, I'd like to ask you each in turn to kick us off, really, to briefly introduce the earned income model or models which you currently have in place at your respective organisations. I wonder if, Paula, I might come to you first.
Hello there. Yeah, we are quite an unusual organisation, National Centre for Writing, in terms of we traditionally are a non-venue based and have a national remit. However, we do now have a venue which opened literally 6 months pre-COVID. So that has kind of shaped our programming development over the years. And definitely pre the venue, because we didn't have a traditional, basically we didn't have a box office income strand. So the organisation did have to think about how it developed its income beyond traditional fundraising, and it's always been an NPO of the Arts Council in the Eastern region. So I suppose that is quite an interesting model in terms of it literally had no box office. It also didn't even literally have like Spectrix or any kind of like the infrastructure that went with that. So essentially it started as very small courses and workshops in person and some online. So I suppose that's probably helped develop the thinking in the organisation in terms of how that's progressed over the years. So yeah, does that give you enough of an intro?
It most certainly does, Paula. Thank you. And I think it's really interesting, as you say, that your sort of starting position wasn't that you had perhaps those more traditional or typical income streams from which to then sort of look further afield. And I'm really interested to dig into the detail of what those income streams look like. So we'll definitely come back to you on that in a moment or two. Peter, how about from your side at Little Angel Theatre?
Hi. Yeah, so we see our earned income model at Little Angel as sort of capitalising on a set of possibilities that we've sort of identified through our work. So examining some of the ongoing activities that we do, things like productions, and turning those into touring opportunities, and really thinking about how that that structure that's already in place could grow. We look at things like more commercial activities like birthday parties, or our secondary earned income and our retail, to our sort of courses and workshops that we deliver. We also work quite closely with partnerships such as higher education institutions, curriculum focused workshops for schools, which unlock and deliver a slightly different output and a sort of add-on to our more traditional stage productions. Alongside our digital resources, which are similar but then can be delivered straight into the home or the classroom. And more recently, we've been really growing on our sort of puppetry commissioning service. So we obviously have a long history of producing puppets for our own in-house shows, but we've really tried to look at how we can grow and support and how that industry need, as puppetry has taken off across the sector, as a sort of area that we can grow. So I would say the sort of the broad principle of how we approach things is looking at that existing activity base and seeing possibilities for growth, rather than finding an actual commercial, a one-off commercial project that sits outside our existing activity.
Great, thank you, Peter. I really like the intention in the phrase you used, capitalizing on possibilities, because that in itself feels incredibly energized to me. And the work that we do with organisations in the sector where we're exploring what the earned income potential might be, I think there's a fundamental need to be energised in that process. And with sort of process in mind, I wonder, Peter, I might come back to you first on this next question, which is, I'm interested in the formulation of any one of the product or service models that you sort of briefly whistle-stop toured us through a moment or two ago. And in particular, I'm interested in understanding a bit more about how an idea has been formulated. Was it a case of sort of developing organically from a program of activity? Did you start by looking at the breadth of assets and then sort of selecting from there? What does that process typically look like for yourselves at Little Angel?
I think it can be a mixture of both. I think an example of something that's sort of grown more organically is sort of the scaling of our touring model, for example, because that's where we're already producing productions. They are our bread and butter, and we're just trying to look at how we can stack up those production costs and still deliver that output that's so crucial to our activity. And for us, that was about scaling. So maybe a particular current context, but the small scale touring model is very challenging at the moment. And we have a fairly small scale venue, but we also recognise that there was a possibility for us to slightly scale up how we developed and delivered our programme of activity so that we could actually start touring at the mid-scale. We're now about to launch into our third production that's touring at the mid-scale, and it's proving a lot more financially sustainable than small-scale touring for us at the moment. So that's a sort of more of an organic growth, a sort of like looking at something we're already producing and seeing where we can just sort of tweak and adjust that model to give a more sustainable return. A sort of flip side of that, of something that's been a little bit more a product development of its own right, has been around, say, for example, our birthday parties. So for our birthday parties, we knew that there was a market there because we had a lot of inquiries from parents wanting to know if there was a way they could celebrate their child's birthday at Little Angel because they loved coming and they thought it would be a great day out for a party. One of the problems that we have is that while we're really lucky to have a venue, our venue is a very small footprint. And so it's really hard to deliver something like a birthday party within that, particularly if the party isn't sort of taking over the whole show. So what we looked at was what the barriers were to why we couldn't deliver that service that our audiences and our beneficiaries were sort of wanting from us. And if there was a different way that we structured that, whether that was an operationally different way or if it was actually that we needed something slightly different, a slightly different product to enable us to capitalize on that interest that was clearly there. And where we got to with that was that we did need a different product. We needed a sort of suitcase show where we could both deliver that in one of our spaces at our venue, so in our sort of rehearsal room, at our studio space, or we could just take that into somebody's home or into sort of a town hall somewhere closer to where someone lived and still be able to deliver a wonderful, fun puppetry show. And actually, we ended up sort of being able to then deliver something further than just your traditional production and sort of cake at the end. We can do add-ons such as craft workshops that happen after some of the productions. We can sort of scale up and down the product, and it opened a lot of doors and possibilities. So I suppose for us it's been a sort of twofold process.
That's really fascinating, Peter. Thank you. And in particular, as you were talking there about the birthday party model, what's quite interesting, I think, is that actually you're taking your methodology, as in theatre, creativity, art, performance, engaging minds, etc., and actually rather than perhaps looking for a new audience to leverage that asset against, to drive additional income, actually there's a huge crossover with your focus audience, I suppose. But what you're doing, of course, is you're broadening the offer for the same audience, being families. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've seen this new commercial income strand through the parties adding value and benefit in terms of audience development when thinking about the main thrust of your activity? Have you seen the sort of the value add that's come from perhaps reaching more families through, you know, the delivery of these parties?
Yeah, so that's been really interesting for us as well, both in terms of, you know, people invited to those parties are almost like sort of advertising for other families, and they come along to see, especially when they're on site with us, they actually are coming to our venues, they're seeing other things that we do, whether that's parties or family workshops or holiday clubs for children. So there's a lot of organic growth that happens there. I think one of the really interesting things that I've been reflecting on coming into this is that we touched on the fact about how you have to sort of know your own sort of organisational output. And one thing that was really critical for us, I think, in terms of making success of our commercial income was actually improving the communication on our charitable outputs. I think it's really been important to us that our patrons have been able to understand a little bit more where their money is going and what it is that it's driving back. So I think previously, before we had some of these commercial income streams, we would be doing our productions and our touring shows, and that would be great. And then quietly in the background, we would have a sort of funded program of sort of community engagement, schools partnerships, which was really at the heart of what we did. We sort of have a very much a sort of inch wide, mile deep philosophy and really embedded relationships, but we weren't really talking about it very much externally. We weren't shouting about it. And actually, I think what has helped is talking to both people who are booking some of these products and also the people who are coming to those performances or the sort of the parties, for example. You know, people do have a social conscience. They are able to go, actually, like if I book a birthday party with this organisation, they're going to drive that money back into this output, which I think that communication has sort of helped us to sort of set us a little bit above some other choices that people might make to make a similar product.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I couldn't agree more. And in my view, organisations across our sector could probably say so much more about the impact day in, day out, and how whether you're buying a ticket, hiring a room, booking a party, or indeed making a donation, ultimately all of that income is flowing into an organisation, and what's coming out of the other side is impact, is change for people. And I think, you know, again, being a third sector organisation, I completely agree. You really can set yourselves apart from perhaps the more commercial offers that might be adjacent or comparator to some of your services. But you can really set yourselves apart in that actually investing in that way is ultimately enabling the organisation to further its purpose and to create positive change for others. Thank you so much, Peter. Paula, I'm going to come to you next. I'm interested in, again, you know, do feel free to speak about a particular area of earned income and activity, but would you share with us how at National Centre for Writing some of those income streams have been formulated into products and what that process has looked like?
Yeah, if I just start with the really traditional one, so, you know, going back to almost when NCW was not necessarily created, but UEA was a key partner to NCW being founded, and also we are, as you know, with a focal office for Norwich City of Literature. So we have quite a strong and embedded relationship with the University of East Anglia, who are a big postgraduate MA in creative writing. So initially, I would say that some of the kind of course programming, so the programming that was very much around talent development, nurturing new writers, outside of a higher education or formal learning, was definitely driven as it kind of developed from that partnership. So I think that's quite an important kind of thing to note. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely something that kind of came out of a concerted and shared agenda. On the side note to that, then there was the reality of the cost, the price of something like that. It was quite a high-end product, I would say, because it had a traditional higher education structure, i.e. 12 weeks, 18 weeks, 20 weeks, and it came at semesters. So it kind of sort of overlaid onto this kind of formula, sort of education structure, if you like. It did end up at quite a high price point because of the level of engagement and commitment from almost a learner psychology. So I think that enabled us to go, well, that's fine at the top end, but actually how do we develop a whole series, a portfolio that sits within that? And how is that part of NCW's purpose around a literature development agency for the East of England? How do we work at a national level for developing talent? What is that talent pipeline? How do we get to those underrepresented voices? So it was really important that we actually sat and looked at, great, we've got this massive course, it's £900. That is a very specific product. How do we then, fill that entire portfolio below that? So that was really important, and definitely an organisational conscious, purpose-driven development plan, and it didn't come overnight for sure. Part of that, without going into the organisation's development, I think there's some key things that happened. For instance, we purchased Spectrix. Now, which was quite an interesting purchase for an organisation that, as I've already said, doesn't have a box office or doesn't particularly sell, hundreds of thousands of tickets. I've come from a theatre background as well, of a 1,300 seat theatre, so I get that kind of machine of bums on seats. So that was quite an interesting, purposely conscious decision to purchase that infrastructure, and also to invest in the website. So I think we had a digital investment a little bit ahead of time because we were driven by these kind of course content rather than shows and tickets. So we needed that infrastructure, and that set us up really nicely for COVID. So where many of our peers had to completely switch up, I hate the word pivot, but had to completely change how they thought about their program, how they thought about their audiences, we were kind of a little bit ahead of the game because our courses were an online product because of the university and the way that so I think in terms of organic development and organisational purpose, I think we, similar to what Peter was saying, it's a bit of both, but for us there was a very definite conscious decision around that, how that product developed. Interesting what you were saying, Peter, around sort of how you communicate the impact and the purpose of your organisation and the added value that that gives to your customer base and your audience. We have a similar thing when you're selling a product that has a price point of, over £600 at the top end to a particular type of audience member or participant, it's really important that they understand that the value of their investment isn't just for them as a writer, that actually we are taking that money and we are then reinvesting it. We have another strand of our income, complete opposite end of the spectrum. We now have a venue. It is a grade 1 listed medieval trading hall. It used to be a museum, and everyone and their brother used to get married here. And part of us being the custodian of this local authority asset is the fact that weddings had to be part of our offer. So we have, but also balancing, we don't want to be the National Centre for Weddings. So there's a huge amount of interest in our weddings. So we set how many weddings we can programme a year, because actually we don't want the venue full of weddings. We need to have our own programme as well. So, but it's really important to those wedding couples that actually they know that money that they are paying us to deliver their wedding for them, actually there is a very large amount of that is actually supporting the venue and keeping the venue open and contributing to our programme delivery. And what we actually do with the couples is our programming team, when we get to know who the couples are, we do have a full-time events manager that we have invested in, who pretty much looks after all of our weddings and corporate hires. But what she does is she kind of gives a brief over to the programming team with a couple, and they will put together a book bundle for them. And it doesn't have loads of books. It's sort of between 3 and 5 books based on their interests or something. And it's kind of a gift that we give to them. So we are kind of connecting the type of people that are wanting to have their wedding here to our own purpose. It's only a tiny thing. but it's a really tiny thing that actually seems to have a really big impact. So it's not quite bibliotherapy, but it's quite an interesting sort of thank you for choosing to have your wedding with us. So yeah, slightly long answer there, but complete two opposite ends of the our kind of earned income model, I suppose.
That's fantastic, Paula, and really interesting. And obviously, you started off by telling us about sort of the germination of those sort of higher end offers coming out of the partnerships that you hold. But I really love what you were just saying then about how you are finding ways to connect those customers who are using the space to celebrate a marriage, for example. You're connecting them back into the organization's purpose. That, to me, that feels, there's a lot of integrity baked into that model, which I think is really exciting, and also something that I would imagine is incredibly important if you are to secure buy-in from colleagues. If we're thinking about moving into new areas of income generation and organizations perhaps doing things that they haven't done before, things that are sitting in alignment or next to the traditional streams of activity, having that organizational buy-in, ensuring that everybody in the organization understands why you're promoting or selling certain products or services, and not just why, but how everybody will perhaps play a role in doing so. That buy-in piece is important to pay close attention to. Paula, how do you as an organization ensure that there is that shared understanding of the choices that are being made around earned income, and as well as ensuring there's an understanding, how do you also bring staff and colleagues along with you as a senior team?
I think a key, I have quite an unusual role in terms of I'm head of comms, marketing, development and fundraising. And that's not every organisation does it like that. And some of that is just the nature of the scale of NCW. We are a relatively small organisation. We employ about 23 staff plus our tutors. So in that respect, my portfolio is quite broad. I technically have two teams within that, but I don't manage them as separate teams. I try to integrate their work functions, perhaps in a different way to maybe other organisations might do. So although we have functional teams within that, I do try to create a kind of a cross-team working, and part of that is I'm lucky within my gift. I have monitoring and evaluation and audience development that also sits within my kind of team function. So the development and fundraising team are very much leading on the monitoring and evaluation. And I think that is really, really important in how we start to get a much stronger buy-in across the teams. What we then have is a really good working relationship with our programming team. We're all in one big open plan office, which definitely helps. We try not to have too much of a massive email culture. So there's a lots of sticking your head above your computer and talking to someone in the room. So we still work from home, but we still have a kind of, you can work a third from home and some in the office. So there's like different things that help create an organizational culture in terms of talking to each other and understanding what's happening in teams. But I think more importantly, the comms and marketing side are very much around helping inform the programming team around audiences, customer bases. We have a programming team that is very receptive to the marketing team saying, hey, there's an audience over here that we're not quite talking to because we haven't quite got the product or the programming isn't quite there. Is there any chance to, do we want to talk to poets? Do we want to talk to older people interested in memoir? Do we want to, how do we get to the underrepresented voices that maybe financially are excluded from this product? But what can we commission? We're very lucky in terms of how we commission work in the team, with writers and translators. We have a great producing function within marketing, again, quite unusual. So I think thinking about the assets that we have within the teams and the organisation, we're quite rich in terms of skills and personalities. And I think some of that is just luck. Some of it's down to our scale. And some of it is definitely down to our art form. I think literature is unusual. I've done music venues, I've done theatre, I've done community arts. So I think there is something quite nimble about the way we can be, which is definitely has a massive benefit. And I would say having a role like mine that umbrellas across two big chunks, and has actually grabbed monitoring and evaluation and audiences as well, is quite important to get that buy-in. And we deliver. So where we say to the programming team, here's this audience, we want to talk to this audience, we want to engage with this audience. If they then work with us and we develop a new product or a new resource or whatever it is, we then work really hard to make sure that we are successful with their product, and we'll represent it, we'll change it, we'll do whatever we need to do to make it work. And I think the proof is in the pudding, and not just in terms of financial transactions and income levels, but also audience engagement numbers, diversification of audiences, so all of those things all build. There's not just one thing. it's so yeah. Is that helpful?
Really, really helpful. Yeah, I think as you were talking then, Paula, I was thinking, gosh, what, for anybody watching, some of the context that you described, of course, is unique perhaps to an organization such as NCW, but the spirit of being responsive, of being porous, of thinking about, those audiences that perhaps you're not yet quite meeting where they are, and also the spirit of inquiry. And it goes back to what I think Peter was saying earlier about the idea of capitalizing on possibilities. So that's super interesting. Peter, I wonder from your point of view, I'd be really interested again to hear how you ensure that buy-in across a staff team. And in particular, I'm interested in where there is perhaps a shift in focusing on sort of subsidized access to cultural assets and activities, where you are starting to lean further into the commercial. Have you sort of had to address any of that sort of awareness or concern, and not just in terms of staff, but also trustees as well? I'd be interested to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. Quite a lot of what Paula just said really resonated with me, to be honest, when she said about being a nimble organisation. We describe ourselves, where possible, as an agile organisation, so very similar in terms of, and we try and embed that through our sort of recruitment process and training and induction for all of our staff, and sort of really embed from the get-go that sort of we're all in it together. Sometimes we'll all have to pile in to deliver a VIP performance for a show, or sometimes we'll all have to pull together to paint the foyer, or to do all sorts of things where it's sort of a collaborative approach. I think one of the difficult parts of talking about organisational buy-in is that it although it can come quite organically, it does take some time. I remember probably about 7 years ago now, inviting our staff team to come to a sort of all staff meeting, and I just said, all I want you to do is bring an idea for a commercial opportunity. It could be to do with your area of work, it could be something totally different. It could earn us £500 in a year, it could earn us 15,000. Although if you've been sitting on a £15,000 idea, I'd like to know why you didn't tell me earlier. But but the idea was that we just wanted everybody to have some agency and some insight into what those possibilities were. One of the things, again, that sort of resonated from what Paula was saying as well, is that we have a quite unusual setup with our fundraising approach, so that the departments that are that we're fundraising for are actually doing all of the primary writing for the fundraising applications. So our community engagement department will write the applications for the projects that they are really wanting to deliver. Obviously, there's a lot of support from the sort of administrative and financial teams in terms of sort of the nitty-gritty governance, budgetary information that goes alongside those applications. But actually, we found that they wrote much more impassioned and sort of relevant applications than when we had a separate fundraising function. And we found that sort of evaluation, reporting, getting insight from the people and the beneficiaries involved was really impactful for that. And we've sort of taken that a step further as well with the commercial earned income that can overlap with some of those activities. So I touched a little bit earlier on how we've used what's called a suitcase show model for delivering our birthday party offering. So we also use a suitcase show model for our outreach work. So when we go into children's hospices, family days at prisons, refugee centres with our Welcome Project, all of those are also suitcase show models. And what we tried to do is sort of really overlap some of those products that have been developed. So, for example, when we were testing the model for the prison family days, we were actually taking our birthday party shows into those environments to deliver that. And our commercial department was sort of supporting the community engagement department from that perspective. But also what we found is the products that we've developed from that community outreach programme do have a bit of a commercial life to them as well, either as shows going into really small venues like libraries or small scale community work, but paid for. And so you're sort of trying to sort of break down those barriers. And one thing that we've really tried to do is trying to push some of that income back directly into the budgets of the departments that are supporting. So when we're pulling together a suitcase show budget, we will try and put in a little bit of commercial income for that. So we will try and have some paid element of the tour that they're delivering. So it will be going 90% to a funded programme, but also it might go into a shopping centre to deliver sort of a week of work during a school holiday. And so I think it's sort of just much more tangibly sort of delivers back to the areas that it's supporting. There's also an opportunity for us, again, to talk in those environments about the community work that we're doing. This is a show that's been delivered for this purpose, but actually we're here delivering it for your entertainment at this moment in time. But it gives us an opportunity to talk about that further. In terms of our governance, I feel like really privileged that our board has always been incredibly supportive of us developing sort of commercial products and enterprising products. I think as we have no core funding, and that's again a sort of a bit of a sort of a basis for why we're such an agile organisation. We have to respond very much to opportunities, funding pots coming in, etc. And so anything that they see that generates a sort of ongoing, consistent income stream and revenue that can sort of underpin some of our more sort of critical work that's at our core is something that they see as being really positive. That's not to say that they don't question us rigorously about the validity of what we're doing and how we are returning that. And that's not to say there's not been challenges. For example, at the moment, obviously, the industry is facing some challenges in terms of sort of cash flow, particularly around this dynamic of theatre tax relief becoming more important to our all of our models. And so when we stepped up to the mid-scale touring, and that obviously also put additional strain on our cash flow on top of that, that was something that we really had to work through and unpick and navigate very carefully as an organisation. So I think it's all about having an open relationship with your boards and your trustees, encouraging them to be a critical friend. Like sometimes in board meetings, people can be so defensive of those critical questions that are being thrown at you. But personally, like Sam and I both sort of welcome that. Those questions are being asked for a reason and for rigor. And as long as they're not sort of too risk averse and too much of a block to moving those things forward, and then we're focusing on what we're trying to get to and the benefit in the long term of creating that sort of like stable infrastructure of which the organisation can sort of have a firm footing. Yeah, I think that's all positive.
Yeah, can I just pick up on something there, because it just made me start to think about, there was a period in time where we were generating quite a significant income from courses. But actually, we're not the National Centre for courses. And I think there's a real balance with your board around they're obviously relieved when you're generating additional income outside of your fundraising income, but actually, you do need to guide them before they start to tread down the commercial and only focusing on what is essentially a could look like a commercially driven product. When you are a charitable organisation, you are funded by the Arts Council for artistic product and talent development. So actually making sure that you know, as much as you want to show that you are, it's great that you're earning this money, you actually do need to remind them that you can't just put all the eggs over there. Actually, we do need to do some, technically what looks like loss leaders, and actually getting that balance between sort of earned income and what perhaps some trustees see as more commercial income. And actually helping them understand that the earned income isn't commercial income, and actually you don't need to be you don't need to set up a limited company to deliver it. It's part of your charitable objectives to diversify that income. And I think what you were saying around rigor, and of course your trustees have a duty to do that. Actually, we have a duty to guide them. Because we could have quite easily have become the National Centre for Courses, and actually really helping them understand that. And although saying that, post-COVID, the courses income was went through the roof. It was like 70% of our earnings. It was absolutely insane. And then obviously everyone in their world went online. We benefited hugely from that, but then that did drop, and we had a massive, the expectations of people shifted in terms of quality of online products, the type of experience people expected, the level of interaction they expected from online products. And so we having to help our trustees understand that we needed to invest in our products now, where perhaps before they were cheaper to produce. Now we needed to really think about where does that R&D come in, and how do we allocate budget from the programming budget actually to help improve the product, improve the delivery, the methodologies, the marketing. I mean, in fact, something quite interesting that we've done, which has been quite a learning curve in terms of marketing and audience development. We have now, initially we thought we needed an in-house digital marketing team. We're not big enough for that. That would be, a theatre would have that. We're not that big. But we've actually worked with our website company who are absolutely brilliant, and they have a digital marketing arm to what they do. So we now buy them in as our digital marketing agency, and they get a Google ad budget, basically, and they also manage our Google ad grants, which is quite significant. So they manage both of those for us and help us drive essentially audiences and sales across the whole portfolio of that strand of our programming now. So that's been quite interesting. But again, getting trustees to understand that we had to invest not just in the R&D of the product, but we had to invest in the marketing of the products, which was, it's quite a big mind shift. So yeah, it's lots of.
Thanks, Paula. Thank you. It's so interesting. We at Achates, we some of our methodology is captured within what we call the Achates triple bottom line, which is the work that you're creating or curating, the audiences that you're connecting with, and the money. And as Peter was talking about the suitcase methodology, it made me think about when I used to work in an opera company, and we had a whistle stop opera, which was a product that the organization had created. It was very nimble. You could tour it to a classroom, you could put it on a stage, and it was created in the first instance to go into communities and for young people. So that was something that, as a director of development, we would fundraise to enable. So the lived experience of the audience consuming the whistle stop enabled us to fundraise against and deliver the activity. But equally, that was a product off the shelf that we were then able to sell to businesses as part of an evening for client entertainment. So it is that idea of looking at your assets as an organization and thinking creatively or more broadly about where the applications might be for that asset. But Paula, I think that point was so well made, that there has to be a balance between the level of, you could lean really far into the commercial focus, but actually in the process lose sight of your some of your other commitments and responsibilities as a charitable organization. So as I say, for us at Achates, it's very much about finding the appropriate balance of that triple bottom line, depending on what sort of organization you are and what purpose you're trying to create. We are running out of time, very sadly, but there is just one more question that I really like to put to both of you before we wrap up. And it comes back to that point about capacity. I mean, Paula, you touched earlier on about the fact that you've got an individual in an events role delivering the weddings, for example. I wonder what your advice might be. Say there's somebody watching today who is thinking about, they're circling around an idea for a new area of earned income activity. What would your advice be for how they might approach thinking about the capacity required? What sort of considerations? Because Paul, you touched on thinking about investing in product and marketing. So I think it's a nice lead in. What considerations would you encourage someone to think about so that they're taking a more holistic view of what it actually might take to build an income, a new income stream? Peter, can I come to you first on that one?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's always a challenge, this one. I think what we found quite quickly was that we did need to have a little bit of a loss leader. We did need to invest a little bit in capacity to drive some of these things forward. For us, one of the things that was really critical was that we found when we didn't have that little bit of extra capacity, it was causing us issues in terms of responsiveness. For example, if somebody wants a puppet to be commissioned or a birthday party to be delivered, they often don't have time or patience for us to go see if we can find a freelancer to do that, cost up what that's going to be, which is slightly unique for all situations, and it was meaning that the sort of model was creaking a little bit, and we weren't able to make a sort of consistent product that we could just offer out there. And so bringing some in-house capacity and delivery to enable that to happen just meant we could just go, yes, you can have that birthday party on this date because I have a staff member and that person is ready to go. And it made a really, really big difference to the confidence of us as an organisation to deliver those products, and also the way that we communicate with the people who are buying them. And as we've mentioned, sometimes these are fairly high price point items, like birthday parties are also incredibly high stress elements to wrangle from parents' perspectives. And so that really made a big difference to us. However, one thing we did try and do in expanding some of that capacity was look at bringing in sort of support from people who maybe could then work in other areas of the organisation if we haven't got quite enough of that product to deliver. So for example, again, that sort of overlap with the community team, those we have workshop producers and facilitators who run all of this area of our work and deliver the birthday parties, but they're also able to deliver into our schools, into our community settings, etc., if the grants are available, and be quite agile and adaptive to things that to other areas. And so it just slightly mitigated some of the risk there. But I would also hugely agree with Paula's point about investing in the marketing. So some of the areas of our work, I think we were very clear that there was a demand out there, and we just needed the product, and we needed to be able to offer a really slick and good product, and the market would be there. For some other areas of our work, for example, some of the digital content that we offer into schools, it's a lot harder. We have to make those connections, we have to spend the time building relationships with schools, etc., and there's a much longer lead-in process to the delivery of that product, and that has been, to be honest, a lot more challenging for us. We've tried to do it by sort of unlocking a little bit of grant funding to do some of the actual delivery for free, but to build some of the relationships in that process and build the product in that process. Sometimes I think this is where we're trying to embed it a little bit more in the delivery department. It's also about a little bit pulling back on the work that you're doing in those areas to create some capacity to have those conversations, which you would have had to do anyway if you didn't have the grant funding or the reserves to continue with that activity as well. So it's about going, rather than going, well, I'm going to have to scale this back in a negative way and reduce the base, actually going, I'm scaling this back a little bit, but with that capacity that's unlocking, maybe we can try and push forward a little bit of this relationship or deliver a little bit here. Again, it takes quite an agile approach and an honesty, I think, within your staff team, which is really hard to get right because a lot of these projects are passion projects. A lot of these people, we all have a great deal of professional pride in what we're delivering. We don't want to say that we won't deliver it or we can't or we have to pull back, but sometimes we do.
Brilliant. Thank you, Pete. There's so much in what you said there that I think is so valuable to people watching. So thank you. Paula, anything that you would contribute as well on that point?
No, I think I would just repeat the fact that it's really important that to cover the capacity and the investment in the R&D, I think that does have to be acknowledged that there is a capacity need. It might be whether it's skills, whether it's actual, people and time or resources or whatever it is. I think understanding that this stuff doesn't come from any, it's not, these are not invisible metrics. And actually, if, like you say, if you can unlock a grant or some trust and foundation income in terms of income generation, and actually how you connect that into, if your traditional trust and foundation income is around L&P outputs, actually how do you work smarter and actually show that can generate an income as well? And I think there is a trick to be made there. We were lucky to get an investment funder. And it was a grant, but it enabled us to invest in our digital capacity. It enabled content creation, so investing in commissioning and product. I mean, that's quite unusual, but it was absolutely business critical. And I think that's, for me, is about how do you make that case to attract that kind of investment for R&D when it's no different from creating a new show.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paula.
I would just add, could I just add as well, we also have an investment funder for some of the work that we do. And it feels like sometimes when we talk to colleagues that's a massive hurdle to overcome, which I appreciate because there's not a lot out there. But actually the work that's taken in building those sort of business models and things like that to get that investor buy-in, that actually it is so worth it. If you are going to carry on and deliver this and have this as part of your organization, you need to have that model developed and stress tested and pushed about a bit by some external sort of critical friends in order to unlock that, and to have other people buying into that product as something is a necessity, but also it's something that actually boosts, I think, your confidence as an organization to move forward with it, and particularly your board's confidence. So just a little word there.
And there's something about similar in a capital model where you would make sure that you were putting money aside for your capital building in terms of maintenance and restorations, etc. It's exactly the same where if you are generating income from within your earned income model, it's making sure that actually you do make a commitment for some of that to go back into your R&D. In the terms of how, Tesco's, all of the big commercial sector operators, they would do exactly the same thing. And I think maybe we need to get a little bit better about staking a claim on some of that income that needs to stay back in the programming team or the producing house model, for sure.
Thank you so much, both. I think, what's really coming through very clearly in today's session is that there are many possibilities, and it is about being alive to what they may be, but there is also no single overnight sort of silver bullet, as it were. And for any organization of any scale, it's about having that appetite to invest the time to carve out the space to do that thinking. And I completely agree with what you were both saying about sort of critical friends and inviting in other sort of perspectives, etc. But clearly I think we've heard today that if you're willing to create that space and to invest the time and to really look at your assets and think creatively about future opportunities, as we've seen from just two organizations today, there are there are all sorts of possibilities. And what's really exciting, I think, is that in both cases, it is abundantly clear that actually the choices that you have made in your respective organisations to earn further income is flowing right back into your core purpose and enabling you to further that purpose in the process. So I can't thank you enough really for being so generous in giving us these insights today. I know it will be really valuable for everyone watching. I have so many more questions that I would really love to put to you both, but for another day. So I will hand back over to Jacoba to wrap us up.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for chairing. And I'd of course like to say a huge thank you to our wonderful panelists, Paula and Peter, for a really thought-provoking and important discussion. As you know, here at Achates, we offer a range of services to help you get the most out of your fundraising. If you would like to discuss how we might be able to support you, or if you'd just like to speak to a member of our team, then please do just drop us a line at info@achates.org.uk. There are also 2 dedicated earned income modules available on Achates Community, which is our support and learning platform for the cultural sector. And if you'd like more information about how you can access that, along with many more resources available on the platform, please do get in touch. Finally, just to note that our next Achates Live will be broadcast in June. There'll be more details to follow on that soon, of course, so do keep an eye on your inbox. And then it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you back with us again soon. Bye for now.